Hi, everybody. It's week 8, and we're doing something just a little bit different for the next 2 weeks, week 8 and week 9. We're exploring a text that is deeply rooted in the 18th century, but is from the 21st. And we are immersing ourselves in a book length poem, uh, NourbeSe Philip Zong, which is at once an incredibly stunning and complex visual experience, while also simultaneously best understood in its orality and in its connection to ceremony and ritual. It's a complex text. It's a serious text that is basically takes the language of uh, the decision around the Zong massacre, which is a heavy topic that I encourage you to take a further look into if you're not familiar. This is one of the kind of um, horrifying moments of the transatlantic slave trade, specifically an insurance claim over the murder of enslaved Africans en route to the Caribbean. Um, and so this poem attempts to do the phrase that comes up a lot is the story that must and cannot be told. And how do you do that? You do it with poetry that lives and breathes in the silences that are inevitable in the archive and breaks down the constraints of legal language, which all of the language of the poem is built from the constitutive parts of the dry legal language of the decision. Uh, it's a bravura performance. It's just been published in its 15th anniversary. It is not a poem that you get a single meaning out of and master and figure out. It's one that you experience, and one that I was lucky enough to hear some of from the poet herself earlier this year, and was able to ask her if the spirit of the idea of the word play was useful to her as a way of understanding the poem. And she said yes, which meant that it skyrocketed into my syllabus. And it's interesting when she talks about the ways in which she's not doing what we think of as erasure or found poetry, but instead is literally, we can almost think about her taking kind of a chopper or a Vitamix to the legal language of the case law around the Zong massacre, and using sounds and syllables to find emergent language that's not only Anglophone, not only in English, but actually in many different languages as the poem continues to develop part by part, piece by piece, through the movements that take us from bones to living flesh once again. A poem that is always on time, always late. Um, the way that she talks about her development of the glossary, the vocabulary of the poem, is through the image of the game of Boggle, the one where you pop the letters in little cubes into the shaker and pop it and see what words you can make. Um, and so we have another set of paradoxes, right? A playful use of language to uh, that is serious play, as we might think about it. And so we are spending 2 weeks on this. And as an 18th centuryist, this first week was very much grounded in um, things like slavevoyages.org and the specifics of the nature of where the Zong was and where it was going. Um, Looking at the apparatus that Philip uses to explain her compositional process and the struggle that she had with it, as well as doing some close attention to um, parts of the poem that struck students. The first kind of moment of the poem is one that almost makes you feel like, what am I even doing? Like, do I read this out loud? How can I read this out loud? What's happening? And we were able to slowly take our time and take care trying to read it aloud as well as to look at it the way that it's laid out on the page. There's lots of white space, and that white space is the space where meaning emerges between the contact points of different syllables and words and phrases as the poem continues. So we took our time in those kinds of ways with those kinds of tool sets this week with the preparation for next week when my wonderful colleague, Dr. Zora Hamsa, who is um, can give us more of a theoretical language from a different intellectual tradition than 18th centuryists or the tradition of close reading or things like that. So that's coming next week as we think about the poem. We're also going to have, by virtue of student schedules and things like that, and illness, two student presentations from the Rutledge companion to the 18th century to bring in more 18th century Black voices into the conversation. Um, and I was nervous that this is our first poem. It's a doozy of a poem, but we were able to make connections that Philip acknowledges but also notes the friction with. The poem has been connected to things like erasure tradition or constraint poetry or language poetry. And she's like, I get it. I get why you'd make those connections. That's not what I want to do. I She doesn't think about it as experimental poetry, in part because experiment suggests a kind of scientific construction, that this is on the way to some kind of, comprehensive knowledge, whereas this is a poem that very much is engaged with um, the story that cannot but must be told, right? That is in some ways forever lost to us, and this act of magic and resurrection. We dove deep into the use of different epigrams for different parts of the poem. I'm still thinking a lot about the fact that Saint Augustine appears twice as epigraphs. We got real deep into the allusion, the quotation of Ezekiel from the kind of uh, the boneyard in different kinds of ways. And so I think we started out with some people who are like, "I think I've got something. I think I think I've got a way in," and some folks who were very nervous. And I think we all found ways in and ways to appreciate the experience of being in the poem, even if we didn't always start out that way. I am glad that we started with dialect, and I'm actually now thinking about um, what would it look like if we spent even more time thinking about, or engaging with the glossary in Zong, before playing dialect and thinking about, that part of the poetic process as something that could inform a playthrough of dialect, not necessarily just slave revolt, but any part of dialect, thinking about some kind of constraint in that sort of way. So my mind is fizzing. I'm also unbelievably tired. We are at mid-semester, just past mid-semester, because we have a 15-week term here. We are cruising into fall break at the end of this week, much needed. And we've had a little bit of shake up in this schedule. Nothing will change, but some formats are going to shift in terms of future class visitors and things like that. So, a short recap this week, but happy to answer questions. There's a ton of links to Philip's doing parts of the durational readings that she has done throughout the years that the poem has existed. And her relationship to that process of discovering the poem after publication is another fascinating element. This is probably an unusual and potentially low traffic recap video. Um, I don't think many people will necessarily find reason to teach Zong in the course of teaching about games, but I think that they probably should consider it. Or if you're just a nerd who is watching this because you think that my other research is cool, I encourage you to pick up the 15th anniversary edition of Zong, and find your way through it. I think it's worth your time. It's certainly worth 2 weeks of our precious, time together, and I'm excited to see what emerges with a different kind of expertise in the room for which I am, eternally and deeply grateful. Um, I'm getting ready for, the first of 2, trips this, this month, so I'm gonna go and get a little bit of rest. I hope you are all doing well wherever you are. Um, Bye.